We thank y'all very much for tuning into the No Fruit Podcast. Today, we have a husband and wife duo, that are bringing back traditional relationships in a modern way. And they have a podcast that discusses everything just like us, from masculinity and femininity to dating, family, helpful books, intimacy, and even their own dirty laundry. Sometimes y'all know we don't like to talk about that, but, we kind of cringe sometimes. But we understand that that's how relationships grow.
Wow.
And we understand that those are the foundational things that we need to talk about. And sometimes we don't even touch. So we're going to talk about a little bit of that, which is understanding your value within a relationship. We'll talk about it right after this.
Let's talk about love and marriage, the way that God intended. Life experience, here we share it. The No Fruit Podcast. Tune in from any platform. No Fruit Podcast. Will help your spirit transform.
So we bring none other to you today than John and Nicole. Thank you very much for coming on to the show today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Sure, no problem. So as I said in the green room, right, we did our research and we talk about value, right? And so there was an idea of this thing called Lamborghini mentality, right?
Mhm.
But I do have a question into that. And for those of you who are listening, I need you to listen to some of the other podcasts that they were on so you understand where the Lamborghini idea comes from. But if someone says that they're a Lamborghini and the other person says they're a Volkswagen, right? Is there more value in one versus the other?
Ooh.
I guess it depends on the context, right? So
Mhm.
are you saying that if someone sees themselves as a Lamborghini, but then sees someone else as a Volkswagen, or
Yes,
is
because here's the reality, right? When we take
Yeah.
a look at the Volkswagen company,
right?
do they not own Lamborghini? Are they
Right.
not more valuable? But sometimes the package looks like a Volkswagen
Mm,
or an Audi versus the Lamborghini or the Bentley brands, but they're all part of the same company.
Same parts,
Mm.
right. Right.
but they're packaged differently. So this is coming and stemming from, I think, some things that Nicole had kind of alluded to with the six-pack, the 6 million, figure salary, and kind of what we look for when we're looking for a spouse. When we're looking to enter a relationship, we look for things on the outside. We look superficially because that's what draws our eye. So the Lamborghini may draw our eye, depending on the person, because I'm the opposite. Like I see
Yeah.
all that and I'm like, oh my gosh, the bills. Like, how am I going to keep that up?
Exactly.
So I'm like, it's pleasing, but I always think the long term, like how's that going to last? And when I was very young, my pastor had said, I wasn't even in high school yet, but this message stuck with me. He's like, everyone's going to wrinkle and everyone's going to gray. Like, so be careful who you partner yourself with, because at the end of the day, are you going to want to push them around in a wheelchair?
Right.
Right.
Because as you said, Nicole, that 6 foot person may always be 6 foot, but I turned to my husband, I was like, wait a minute, but if they're in a wheelchair, they're no longer 6 feet
Right.
tall,
Yeah.
now that, they're shorter than you. So, so that was kind of what Maurice's question
Yeah.
was.
So what are y'all thoughts about that idea of Lamborghini versus Volkswagen mentality?
Mm.
Yeah.
So like focusing on the outward
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
what's on the inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did want an episode kind of on this as well too, where like talking to women as a woman specifically, we can get really hung up sometimes on like I talked about the 6-pack and the 6 foot, and a lot of women, they don't budge on those things.
Right.
And I talked about how it's better to have like a love standard, a standard for the love, the type of love that you want.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's not really going to be based on what someone looks like on the outside.
Right.
But we also did a podcast too, where I talked about how some of my girlfriends, I have to try to convince them to be like, you're the Lamborghini, not in the sense of like, you're perfect, you don't have anything that you need to work on, but
Right.
like they're so hard on themselves that sometimes they need that like pickup of,
Yeah.
you need to see the good in you and
Right.
work on things that you can work on and know what you're bringing to the relationship as well too. So
Right.
it's funny because there's so many like different things I've talked about with the Lamborghini
Yeah. Wait,
situation. But in the terms of outward appearances, trying to gratify yourself by using your partner's
Mhm.
outward appearance. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. John is definitely a Lamborghini on the outside and the inside. He's wonderful, and you know, he's everything I could ask for. But if you just focus on the outside, a lot of times you still don't feel fulfilled because you're missing those love standards and values that you want on the inside. That's going to last longer term, like you said. Like, it's not going to fade who someone is on the inside.
Yeah. I think that it's, you know, well, I think there's two ways to look at it too. Is I do think that to a degree, the outside can be a reflection of the inside. It doesn't always have to be, right? So, for instance, if you develop yourself on the inside, right, develop your character, and so some those attributes will start to display on the outside, right? So maybe you're going to be more fit because you have discipline, right? Maybe you're going to have more care about your appearance, right? Because you've developed a sense of self-reliance and self-esteem, so you care more about that. And yeah, and I think that you can see some of those things, but it doesn't, just seeing the outside doesn't necessarily give you the indication of the inside, right? Even making more money, you might make more money because hey, you've got the discipline, you've got the integrity, and you've developed those principles that guide you. But you know, like when I'm coaching guys, for instance, I'll tell them that, you know, what's the most important thing in a woman that you're going to marry, and it's going to be that she has a high desire for you and she treats you like a king, because those are the things that over time, right? Yeah, you know, everyone's going to get older, right? That outside appearance is going to change, and those are the things that will really matter in the relationship, in the marriage, in the long run. And so if you're just judging the outside appearance and you're saying, okay, this person looks like a Lamborghini and this, then you're going to be going off of the wrong information. It's good to say, okay, yeah, what kind of style of car do you like? What kind of outside appearance do you like that you're drawn to? I think that's important. But if that becomes the sole basis of what you're making a decision on, then, you know, like Nicole said, you should have the love standard. That makes a lot more sense. So.
Yeah, and so the reason why I drew up those two perspectives, right? You know, so you know, if I'm driving a Lamborghini, but she's driving a Volkswagen Beetle, but guess what? They still have the same oil filters, or they might, you know, like so they still running on the same thing. And sometimes we get caught up in the semantics part because we don't always understand the culture that the other person grew up in. We don't know their community 100%. And sometimes we don't give them that grace or that latitude to understand them a little deeper. I think that's what, you know, one of the things that you're talking about. So how would someone treat someone as a king or a queen, especially if we did not see that in our community or our culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's a big problem, is that today we're not seeing that. Most people growing up today, especially young people today, they have no idea what masculinity looks like, and femininity is even less. It's even more confusing. It's very hard to find any kind of resource on what femininity is. Or you ask them, and they could probably tell you a little bit about masculinity. And so I think what has to happen is that you have to find resources, right? That's why one of the things that we do is we compile the books. We talk about different books that I think are valuable, but it's hard to find a mentor. It's hard to, you know, that's also the reason why we're doing our podcast too, is that, you know, we were just discussing this the other day about how we can't save the world. The world is doomed, right? And we're not going to change all of the society, but we can be a beacon, right, for the people that want to learn, that want to understand these things. Because a lot of people growing up have not learned these things. These concepts are completely foreign. You know, the world we live in is a very a society that is very woke and feminist, and you know, it does not see any value in these traditional values between a man and a woman. And so it's hard because, you know, that it's not what a lot of people are being taught.
Right.
Yeah. We say that a lot on our podcast as well, that it's just not being taught. And it starts with us, you know. So I'm so happy to hear that you're sharing the same information and that you're putting it out there. And no, neither one of us, not our podcast nor your podcast, can reach every person, but
We
it's a
working towards it.
podcast and it's
Yeah.
worldwide and people can listen to it at any time. So we kind of go like, hey, we can reach 1 million people, but it's one person at a time.
Right.
It's one podcast at a time. It's one guest at a time, and we're
Mhm.
going to get there, and people are going to hear that message, and we are going to make that change. So I don't
Right.
want to think that we can't make the change, because we can, one person, one podcast at a time. And each time that we share our voice and we share our message and we share our experience, it helps people to understand that what they're watching on TV, what they're seeing on social media that ain't it.
Right.
Right.
That's not it at all. So I'm so happy that
That's
you're
fantasy.
It's not even fantasy. It's just the devil. That's all I can kind of say at times. It's just so strange, because when I look back at what my kids have watched on television and the lack of morals that are there, the lack of, as you said, masculinity and femininity just within the main characters, it's just mind blowing, and it is a struggle, and that our children are now 23 and 21, and we've seen them grow up to this point, and through high school, it was just such a stretch and a struggle to see not only just their friends, but even those who are their teachers and their leaders in the school. And again, that masculinity and that femininity just wasn't there. So tell us a little bit more, about how we can help that next generation to understand masculinity and femininity.
Yeah.
I think our biggest thing is that trying to showcase the good in both masculinity and femininity, because I feel like today it's just so negative towards men and women. Like we're all sorts of mixed up. Men, are leaning more towards the feminine side, and then women are leaning more towards the masculine side. We've gotten all sorts of mixed up. And then women they're afraid to be feminine because they don't want to be weak, since they've been so masculine and had to be strong. But, really trying to teach people that like being feminine isn't a weak thing. It's actually a beautiful thing. It's a freeing thing. It, if you have that feminine core inside of you, which I believe most women do, that when you get to experience that in the safety of a masculine man who has your back and you trust and will protect you and provide for you, it is like the most freeing, wonderful experience that you can ever have. And then John is such a wonderful masculine man, and like he comes from a place of love, and so many messages are not geared towards that. The masculinity is very aggressive and angry, and it's not coming from this place of love for everyone and everything. And so we're just trying to show people the benefit of this, because I think they genuinely don't understand that it's good to be feminine and it's good to be masculine in the right way. And when you come together, it creates this union that would blow their mind. Like they think that it's 50-50 and we both have to be individuals and we can't rely on each other, we can't need each other. And our whole message is that no, it's okay. And actually you feel so much better when you have someone that has your back and you're all in 100%. So I think that's what society needs.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that I focus I feel like it really, the best thing we can do is teach men, because men are supposed to be the leaders, and so women are more responders. And and just in my dating, I experienced this, is that guys would say, oh, women today, they're so feminist and all of these things, and then I would date women and they would be feminine around me because of the way that I'm acting, which is causing them to, it's bringing out the feminine. And the same thing when Nicole and I met, she was able to relax into her feminine. And so I'm pretty hard on guys because men don't have pride in being a man today, the good sense of pride, right? That it means something, and they're like, life is unfair. So they have a victim mindset. They don't understand how to step up and lead. They don't want to step up and lead. They want things to be 50-50. They say, oh, well, women get to do this and that. And my analogy to men is sort of like, men are the gardener, women are the garden, and you're responsible as a man for your whole household. But the woman that's in your life, whether she, whether a weed comes up, you get some nagweed in your garden, or you get a beautiful blossom, it's because you're the one who's the gardener,
Mhm.
right? Women are more adaptable and independent on how a man acts and leads. And so I think really if we want to help people the most, we have to start with young men, get them to take pride in being a man, to understand what it is to be masculine man,
Mhm.
to understand that a man's greatest gift to this world, just like Jesus Christ, is love, to sacrifice, to lay down his life for another. That's the greatest love that someone can have, and that is a different kind of view of masculinity than what people think of masculinity,
Right.
right? It's, you know, so I think when we help young men to understand that you need to step up, life is not fair. It's not supposed to be fair. It is
Mhm.
harder for you as a man. That's great. You should take some pride in that. That's what it means to be a man. That's why, you know, you can't have authority without responsibility, accountability.
Mhm.
So, you know, if you're the captain of the ship of your house, then you're responsible for every person in your house. What they do, it's on you. And I think that's really the key, is because when you have a man that can step up and lead and leads with love, women respond to that. And the feminine, because the feminine can't just come out on its own, it needs a
Right.
safe, protected space in order to bloom and flourish. If a woman is just feminine in a harsh environment, she's going to get trampled on just like any rose. So there has to be that safety first. So if we obviously we talk to women as well, and I'm sure you guys do as well, but really the change begins with the man, because he's the one. You know, a woman can only do so much in the relationship, and she can do things obviously to be a better wife, but a man has so much more of
Right.
the power of changing the dynamic, and also affecting the children's lives as well. So I
Mhm.
think the real focus has to be on teaching men to grow up as masculine men who lead from love, who have servant leadership.
You know, I think some of the challenges, and I only can speak for myself, growing up in a single parent home, right? And so I guess I saw a masculine perspective from a feminine life. You get what I mean? You know, so
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so how do you overcome a situation like that if a lot of guys are coming up in that space? Because our respect for women is like, hey, y'all are technically the leaders because I'm a kid or whatever it is. So how do we overcome that if that's all we see?
That's funny that you said that, because I actually listened to the CEO podcast,
Okay.
Oh,
Diary of a
Diversio, yeah.
CEO, and they were just talking about this, actually talking about how, if you're a single mother, raising children, to try to bring more like masculine figures into your child's life. That doesn't have to be like a partner,
Mhm.
because we want to make sure we're picking the right person. But the whole like episode was talking about men and masculinity and the
Mm.
same sort of situation. And, they were talking about how there's not that many male teachers in school anymore. And,
Mhm.
there's not a
Mhm.
lot of coaches that, they're not getting paid, they're not getting the recognition. So there's
Right.
like men are losing these masculine figures in their life. And
Mhm.
so they mentioned that, if you're a single parent, to try to, even if it's like an uncle or a grandfather or,
Yeah.
or a neighbor that a man that you trust and who comes over and like, helps fix something up around your house, or any sort of like masculine figure that you trust, to like introduce them to your child, or put them in a sport, where they
Mhm.
have like a coach that's a good masculine figure for them. Because they were talking about how, like, even with Boy Scouts being gone, like
Mhm.
boys don't have these
Mhm.
places where they used to go and just be around guys and have a male coach or teacher teaching them. And unfortunately society is kind of like
Yeah.
push those all away. But it was a good
Yeah.
conversation to listen to, because I think we're going back in the right direction as far
Mhm.
as like providing men, the support that they need, the good support. Because they
Yeah.
talked about how, because of the lack of these things,
Mhm.
men and boys are getting so upset. They're like, life isn't fair. And then they're going to these like angry sort of like men who hate women and all these things. They're going
Yeah.
down that direction.
Right.
And whereas if we give them healthy like outlets to be masculine and to be a man and grow into a man, then they're more likely to become the men that are coming from a place of
Mhm.
love. So I highly recommend listening to that one if you guys haven't, because it was really good, and it
Yeah.
talked about that. And I think what we're talking about here, I think, like John said, it starts with a man to some degree when it
Yes.
comes to the relationship part.
Yeah.
So I think it's really good that we're giving men back their time,
Mhm.
because I feel like as a society we were like, no, don't let men hang out together. But now it's like, no, they need their guy time.
Right.
They need that influence in their life.
We're all a product of our environment, of the
Mhm.
inputs that we have, and so
Mhm.
that's where we have to control the inputs, right?
Mhm.
So that's where, as a parent, I think, if you're a single parent raising a boy, you got to watch carefully what is he watching on
Mhm.
TV, what music is he listening to, what are his friends, the friends that you have are probably the biggest influence on your life, on who you'll
Mhm.
become, you will eventually become, right? We say that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with,
Right.
but not very many people select the 5 people with that in mind. And that, as a parent, I think you have to really be careful to make sure that the selection of the friends is important. Also the books, right? This
Mhm.
is something that I always harp on, is if you're reading the right books, if you're constantly getting the right inputs, then that will change the identity that you see yourself. And so, you know, we're raising a daughter, right? So, but what we do, is we have her reading on the way to school and back. She's
Mhm.
got personal development books that are on the audiobooks that,
Mhm.
and then every night we do 20 minutes of reading time after dinner, of personal
Mhm.
development reading time, because I know with this world and all this stuff she's being exposed to, I need to control the inputs as much as possible. So I think
Right.
that's what we have to do for young men, and get them in, like Nicole said, is to groups of men's groups, where there are in an environment of other men that are
Mhm.
positive masculine role models. It's hard to find them today,
Right.
but building those groups, I think, is essential.
Yeah, I think some of that as well is the level of respect, between men and women. I think that's kind of lost. It's been lost going on for quite some time. Because I just knowing my own background or whatever has been, I've heard a lot of men bashing. So so automatically it makes me stand back a little bit. It makes me, because that's who my leaders are, right?
Right.
So I'm I'm not as comfortable in that space. So how do we turn that narrative so we are comfortable in that space, to look for those guys that can be our mentors, our coaches, or whatever it is. Because the other part of that as well, I mean, because I used to coach little league football and basketball, and
Yeah.
so and I listen to some of the parents where they don't trust men even in that space, as well. So how do we change that narrative? Because they start using us as babysitters more than anything else.
Yeah.
So how do we change that narrative? Just that level of respect.
Yeah, there's a really good book I'd recommend. It's called why am I losing the name of it now? The Queen's Code. It's
Okay.
by Alison Armstrong, and that's a book every woman should read. Every man should read that book as well. But it really talks to what you're saying about this kind of disrespect for men, or like really bashing men, and seeing that and I think this is just the key in general, which is that we have to understand that men and women are different,
Hmm.
not bad or wrong. Because
Hmm.
as a man, one of the things Nicole really caught on with that book, which I agree so much, is that uh, men, our way of thinking, we have a singular focus, where
Hmm.
women have a diffuse focus of awareness, and that's just, it's not good or bad. In fact, both are great to have together. But we tend to, women tend to judge men by women's standards,
Hmm.
not understanding that there's certain things that are valuable about a man, and how he acts and behaves, that's different. And men
Hmm.
tend to judge women by their own standards, and see a woman through that lens. And so, as we have more grace for each other, and
Hmm.
realize that it's those differences are good things, and stop hating on people just because of it's easy to get on the bandwagon, and to say, oh yeah, women are like this, or men are like this, but it's so much more beneficial to have grace and to not judge, and to instead be curious. We replace the judgment with curiosity. Say, oh, I wonder why this is the case, right? And why is this person acting this way? I think that's really what is most effective. But that book, The Queen Code, I think is extremely good for men. I always recommend The Way of the Superior Man, to understand the feminine a little bit better and to appreciate that. But when you really understand the feminine as a man and as a woman, when you really understand the masculine, you appreciate it and you don't bash it. And one of the things that we said, I forgot, maybe a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this, and it's almost like you have to look at, when you see a woman, no matter what, in this society, women and men both have wrong ideas, brainwashed by a lot of bad things. But as a man, when I see a woman, I try to see the feminine, no matter who the woman is. I see a little girl, right? A little girl just wanting to be loved, right? And as women, you can see there's a little boy in there, right? No matter what the guy is, the way that he's acting, there's a little boy in there that just wants approval, that just wants to feel like a hero, to be someone's hero. And that's there in all of us. And so I think when we start looking at people through that lens, we could see past the stuff that is been piled on top of them with society and the defects that, and we see, what is the true core, the true essence that we can love and appreciate. But when we don't do that, and we just say, oh, they're wrong, they're bad, that's where we create all this strife between men and women. And we end up teaching our children to hate women, or to hate men, or to not trust women, not to trust men. And that's just a horrible place to be.
I'm going to be honest with you, John, for one moment.
Yeah.
Yo, bro, have you been in our conversations lately, man? Like, because we just had these type of conversations most recently. And I think these are the type of things that sometimes we don't, because communication is key, but there are some things that don't come out in the initial conversation. Some things don't come out. I mean, we've been married for 25 years, right? Going on 25. And so it's just some things we're covering now that we didn't cover when we first started dating 28 years ago. You get what I mean? So some of that is communication. Some of it is patience, right? And really taking the time to be very attentive to what's going on, because sometimes we're not attentive enough, And so if for those of us that are struggling with that, because I say y'all are a great team, y'all pay attention, y'all communicate, so for those individuals that have not gone to that level, where can they find you and talk to you and find your coaching, all those type of things, if they're not at that place yet?
Yeah. So mostly on YouTube we do video podcasts every week. So Better Than Perfect Podcasts. You can find us there. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So yeah, I've got a channel of my own Bulldog Mindset where I'm mostly focused on teaching men and coaching men. But yeah, Better Than Perfect Podcast on YouTube is sort of the home base. Every week we do an episode. So.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. We appreciate that. But we do have one more question though for y'all before we let y'all go.
One more question for you both. And I'd like to hear the feedback from each of you if possible. We've talked a lot about relationships and communication and just that knowing one another. So, and knowing one's own strengths. So my last question for you both is, if you could sing a duet with anyone in the world, living or deceased, who would you sing that duet with?
John.
That's what I was going to say. Sing the duet with you. I think that's the only choice.
That's the only choice? Yes.
What else would I pick, So,
I don't know what song we would sing, though.
What song would we sing?
But we would have a choreographed
song?
dance as well, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about that song from Moulin Rouge? Was the
Oh, okay.
The dream, was it?
Come What May.
Come What May, maybe.
Okay, yeah, we danced to that at our wedding.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Oh,
That's
nice.
a dramatic one. You're great for
There
that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Great,
We
great.
thank y'all. I mean, we expected something different though. Cause we
really?
assume y'all, would sing with each other, right? So, but we, again, I'm gonna be honest with you. I like the genuineness and authenticity in that answer. Cause sometimes we don't look at each other as that perfect partner in everything in life. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that because I think that added another element to your answer as well.
No.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Because it's like, I know I would have the most fun with John doing it, right? Like, I
Right.
know we would have the best time. Like, would we be the best singers? Probably not.
Right.
In time.
So,
In time.
you
With
know,
practice.
but I just know that it would be so fun with him and, you know, a core memory for us. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing that information,
Mhm.
and all of the information about your contact for your podcast will be listed in our show notes. So for those who are listening and can't write those things down, please know that information is available in the show notes. And we thank you all so much for coming on today, both John and Nicole. And we thank all of our listeners for listening
Right.
to the No Fruit Podcast.
And we will talk to y'all just a little bit later.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the No Fruit Podcast, where we bring you fruitful conversations, ripened wisdom, and love that's deeply rooted. We hope today's discussion left you feeling uplifted, encouraged, and ready to take on life's journey with purpose. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration in their day. You can catch up on past episodes, send us your thoughts, or learn more about us on social media. Until next time, stay rooted in love, and remember, every seed you plant today shapes the fruit of tomorrow. Take care, and we'll see you next time.